I was kind of shocked at the end of the documentary. It seems like you believe that, and maybe I'm wrong, that Danny Casolaro did commit suicide. Is that right?
I do believe that.
Wait, that he committed suicide?
Oh, sorry. I spaced out.
Clip that, Steve.
You asked me, do I think that Danny? No, I mean, do
you believe he committed suicide?
There's a point where basically throughout this whole process, you can make a really good case for murder and a really good case for suicide. The problem is that the both of the arguments are there's so much kind of compelling data on both sides. As a researcher, when you're looking at the stuff, you're kind of getting ping-ponged back and forth between these two conclusions. And Zach's captured and showed that feeling of, oh, maybe he did kill himself, or then maybe he got killed. You're always, sometimes in one day, you're experiencing those.
There's got to be fatigue to spending so much time and getting the factor of getting burned out.
Yeah,
we burned out and relit the candle
many times over.
Many times.
But yeah, I think like at the end, we show this, that there was, the police had said he was alone in Martinsburg, and then we showed this composite drawing that clearly he had been with someone.
Basically, I mean, how I view it is like,
another person saw someone entering the room, and so now we're like dealing with this information and Christian. I said this information, not disinformation, but there is disinformation out there as well.
I think Christian's, like, how I see it, his default position, right, is kind of like throughout this process was kind of like 51%, and it would vary widely. And both of us would vary widely on this, sort of going over the edge on this. Either way, of like 51% Christian is kind of like I think Danny was murdered guy. And I'm kind of like the 51% Danny committed suicide guy.
That's 51% he committed
that's
suicide?
kind of my default position. I'm just like inherently a skeptic of like conspiracy stuff, and just like the idea that this would be such an organized, it's very difficult murder to pull off cleanly, where you have zero physical evidence linking it to, for it to be such a bloody room and
right.
Nobody having seen somebody.
No bloody footprints, things like that.
And so
suicide note.
So, but we would kind of.
Did they analyze the handwriting from the suicide note? I never heard anything about
they did.
It looks like his handwriting.
Does it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's also, importantly, a suicide note.
But wasn't he also missing 3 fingernails? And one of the biggest parts of it is his tendons were severed. Like, how do you sever your own tendons and use your thumbs to sever the other tendon?
When we interviewed the one of the paramedics who found him, who's now a medical examiner actually, which is interesting to me. That was his big point, right? Is like, and we show it in the documentary, is like, how do you hold a razor if your tendons are severed, because you can't grip anything with your opposable thumbs, right?
Was it an actual razor blade he used?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and I think that's a really good point, but we
he or they, right?
Right.
You're saying
that, right.
Oh yeah.
Right. Or the person.
Or the person. Yeah.
What's his name? Joe? Joe Coelho?
Potentially. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is like we would go back and forth about this constantly, and I think that you see that tension, a little bit of that tension of us trying to grapple with this throughout the process. I would say that, like, for me, when I read the FBI's report on what the DOJ FBI report on what happened to Danny Casolaro, that was basically there were several investigations, but there was the Martinsburg police investigation, which was immediately after Danny's death, and then there was a follow-up investigation by Janet Reno's Justice Department, so on a federal level, and they were reviewing the Martinsburg Police Department's thing, and then they were re-interviewing people. But when I read that thing, I found it to be a very compelling snapshot of what Danny's life was in the year before he died, and their conclusion is that Danny committed suicide, and they lay out. It's a good, useful timeline of what they knew of what he was doing in Martinsburg and all that stuff. But as we show, and this is sort of like a spoiler alert, I would encourage anybody to really go on the ride of watching the movie before listening to what I'm about to say. But once we and Christian got the documents from Martinsburg Police Department that nobody had seen since they were created, outside of the police, which we had been told repeatedly were under seal from the Department of Justice, from the Federal Department of Justice. We were told we can't fulfill this FOIA request because the DOJ says we can't. That was what they told Christian years ago. I came back to them and I said, please show me a piece of paper that says that you can't, that the DOJ has this under seal, because
show us anything.
Show us anything. And they sort of, would push back. And then eventually, and you see it in the show, their lawyer called me, really nice guy. And he said, I can't find anything. Like, you're welcome to see these things. And so after pushing on them pretty hard and banging down the door, we finally got access to that. And what I'm trying to get at is that the official story of what happened to Danny Casolaro, according to the authorities, which is the Martinsburg Police Department and the FBI and the DOJ, is clearly not the real story.
Right.
Because
they suppressed a letter or a witness.
They just
document.
never brought. They essentially, in my view, and I don't cast even blame or aspersions. It's a complicated story, even if there's nothing pernicious going on, evil, DOJ, cover up. Like, it's just a complicated story. Yeah. And like Christian says, if you want to conclude that Danny committed suicide, that's a solid, couple months of your life investigating it. If you want to conclude that he was murdered, it opens up so many problems, because it's like what Danny was looking into, the people he was dealing with are so difficult to pin down. Their role, their connection to the federal government is pretty messed up, and it just creates problems, right? And it just creates a lot of time. You just have to go. It took Christian 12 years to do this thing, right? And you could argue we didn't get fully through everything. So it's a lot easier to say he committed suicide, and that's what they said. And so whether they were disingenuous or not, the problem is that there was. The evidence they presented was all the evidence that supports their conclusion.
Yes.
And they didn't include any of the stuff that raises questions like, oh, well, there was somebody who saw somebody else going into his room. Like,
why did they hide that?
Why not follow up with the woman and ask her more questions? Like, it's like, or there was somebody who gave a sketch of somebody else. If your theory is Danny was depressed, screwed around by all these conspiracy nuts, went to Martinsburg, had no evidence to back up this wild story that he had been fed by these con artists, was so depressed that he had no money, he commits suicide in a bathtub in Martinsburg in 1991. Okay. So, and he met no one. No, he didn't meet anybody that weekend. Okay. Well, if you have anything that shows that he was meeting with people, it's a problem. And they didn't include that stuff. So what I'm getting at is, the official story
also
is
that
not the story.
There were no work papers. He didn't have any research papers on him at all. He wasn't working on the story. And this note in his shoe, there's like...
Oh, yeah, we never even bring that up in the show just because it's like... there's so many stuff that we just couldn't fit into the program. But it's good to be able to come here and kind of tell all the stuff that we couldn't fit in, But the note in the shoe is really weird.
What's the note in the shoe?
He has like a chapter outline for...
Well, tell it, like, the note in the shoe, there was a piece of paper in his shoe that was sent off to the West Virginia State Police they sent all the evidence, all the stuff that was with Danny.
Physical evidence.
All the physical evidence. Mm-hmm. And one of the people in the lab found just a blank piece of paper in his shoe. But this enterprising dude who we could never get access to, he would never return our calls. He's a lab technician, and he does some sort of chemical analysis on it or something. And it shows that it's actually got an imprint on it that was written on the same legal paper that the suicide note was written on, and it's an outline of the first chapter, right, of Danny's book. So it's like, okay, he has no papers with him in Martinsburg, except he obviously is working on this thing when he's,
It's very strange. And why is that piece of paper in his shoe? It's,
I mean,
so weird.
it doesn't give us any sort of, it's like, wow, that's the smoking gun, but it's just like, it's just weird.
It's the sizzling data point.
Yeah.
It's just crazy because, I mean, the whole first 80-90% of the documentary just like is blatantly in your face that this guy got murdered, even leading up to the couple weeks before the weeks before he died, when he's getting calls, people threatening to kill him. And he's telling his brother and telling people, like, if something happens to me, it was not an accident.
Right.
And then, so if he's doing all this stuff and telling the story to all these people, why would you go kill yourself?
Well, that's
just to make some grandiose.
That's what doesn't sit well with me, is that if he did kill himself, he was also conning his family into believing that he was murdered in this elaborate thing because they're Catholic and whatever. And I, as I've gotten to know the Casolaro family and what I've learned about Danny, just that also just does not seem kosher. And I don't like that. That's a tough part for me, that he would like lie to his brother and con his family.
But as a caveat, and Tony, his brother, says this in the documentary, it's like, anybody can commit suicide for any number of reasons. You know what I mean? It's like, we're not psychologists, nor are we like qualified to really weigh in on this, but like, I like to keep a very open mind. It's like, there's no, just like, oh, well, he definitely didn't commit suicide, because, it's a complicated subject matter that's too complicated for us to even like have fully gone into and told his story in the thing. So we keep an open mind about that. I just want to say that.